Morning everyone, week 6, and I'm going to just run through some auctioneer training. And funny, I had a request at one of my auctions a wee while ago, and the people wanted to know who I was communicating with and how. And this dates back to probably Uncle Alec Cuthbertson training, and Tony Fountain, the leading Australasian stock and horse auctioneer and property auctioneer, that both had a significant amount of influence on my training and style. So, moving along, what was hand signals? And hand signals when you're bidding probably dates back to no mic, no sound system, stock moving around. Some yards might have multiple auctioneers going on at the same time, sheep and cattle and what have you, or big rooms. So you tend to, the older auctioneers, this isn't taught at the new auction schools, and new I mean in the last 20 years. So this dates back to 1920s, 30s, all the way through the 70s and 80s into the 90s, and then it seemed to wane, and they just went on verbal bids, and paddles and things like that. Well, paddles never existed, so yeah, that's a reasonably common thing today, part of the theatrics of today, but you don't use paddles in a stock auction or fruit and veggie auction. Different formats is probably what I'm saying. Anyway, moving right along, I'm going to run through, obviously I'm left-handed, you would have picked that up by my use of the gavel. So I use the gavel all the time. Wherever I am, I have my gavel. Some auctioneers are only hand, so they will use the hand and point the bid sometimes like that, but I have the gavel, and I'll use my right hand, which I'm not. You're going to work out that that's not my dominant hand. So sometimes these, unless I'm in an auction and they're just working really well, they I might just need to slow it down. So think of these hand signals. We've got the bidding running. I might have close bidders, but I've got somebody standing 80 meters away, and they still want to know where I'm at. So if I'm in the millions, it could be 1 million, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 type thing. So you'll see me just go through the hand, and then there's variations to it as well. You'll find that Tony Fountain and Uncle Alec had different sevens. Uncle Alec's 7 was a hook, and Tony Fountain's 7 was sideways, and that's just a personal preference, and probably different backgrounds. So we'll move right into this, and then I'm probably going back to some Missouri auction training. So here we go, and just bear with me. So 1. Okay, let's just go back. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 can be this way, 7, 8, 7 hook, 7, 8, going back to 9 can be 9 again, 10, 11. So you'll see then there's variation. So if we're at in the 70s or 700s and you're going through your fingers, but generally this can be 12, can be 11, can be 7, depending on your auctioneer. So I'd suggest that you watch them below the reserves. I'm using this all the time, and sometimes I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So if I've got my gavel and I'm using my left, it means that the bidding is very, very heated. And if you're at the back of a room, if it's an auditorium, you can't hear, or you're at the back of a stockyard or something like that, that lets you see where the bidding's at. You don't necessarily, you know, the old bloke, I shouldn't say old blokes because that's what I am, but it helps you to come into the bidding. You see where we're at. So if we're at 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 5, and 1, 5 might come in, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 2 million. So that's an example of the old hand signals. So just in case you're at an auction and you see the auctioneer using his hand, you know he's an old auctioneer. He's probably very thorough, good call, good rhythm, but is still exercising the fingers and showing the bids, showing you where they're at, which is really good. Now I'm going to move back to, yep, some of you have seen our auction. I'm just going to get rid of this one. I've got 2 running at the moment, so we're going to go back and just close this sucker down. There we go. The Missouri auction is probably might go back to, which is good. It's the simplest, most effective, good training for Monday, Tuesday. 1, would you give 2, 2, would you give 3, 3, would you give 4, 4, would you give 5, 5, would you give 6, 6, would you give 7, 7, would you give 8, 8, would you give 9, 9, would you give 10. 1, would you give 2, 2, would you give 3, 3, would you give 4, 4, would you give 5, 5, would you give 6, 6, would you give 7, 7, would you give 8, 8, would you give 9, 9, would you give 10, 10. So there you go, there's an example of me using it in this scenario. It's a lot easier live, and you'll see it. You see an auctioneer doing it live. Separate hand is really impressive. With the gavel, it's a wee bit harder, but you'll notice that people will concentrate on the gavel and not the call, so that they know where they're at. 1, would you give 2, 2, would you give 3, 3, would you give 4, 4, would you give 5, 5, would you give 6, 6, would you give 7, 7, would you give 8, 8, would you give 9, 9, would you give 10. 1, would you give 2, 2, would you give 3, 3, would you give 4, 4, would you give 5, 5, would you give 6, 6, would you give 7, 7, would you give 8, 8, would you give 9, 9, would you give 10. 1, 1, would you give 2, 2, 2, 2, would you give 3, 3, 3, 3, would you give 4, 4, 4, 4, would you give 5, 5, 5, 5, would you give 6, 6, 6, 6, would you give 7, 7, 7, 7, would you give 8, 8, 8, 8, would you give 9, 9, 9, 9, would you give 10, 10. 1, 1, would you give 2, 2, 2, 2, would you give 3, 3, 3, 3, would you give 4, 4, 4, 4, would you give 5, 5, 5, 5, would you give 6, 6, 6, 6, would you give 7, 7, 7, 7, would you give 8, 8, 8, 8, would you give 9, 9, 9, 9, would you give 10, 10. 1, 1, would you give 2, 2, 2, 2, would you give 3, 3, 3, 3, would you give 4, 4, 4, 4, would you give 5, 5, 5, 5, would you give 6, 6, 6, 6, would you give 7, 7, 7, 7, would you give 8, 8, 8, 8, would you give 9, 9, 9, 9, would you give 10, 10. So that's a simple bit of voice training, get you concentrating on your numbers. Now we're going to just bring that filler down. 1, would you give 2? 2, would you give 3? 3, would you give 4? 4, would you give 5? 5, would you give 6? 6, would you give 7? 7, would you give 8? 8, would you give 9? 9, would you give 10? Not too bad. So you notice that I'm not taking a lot of breaths in between, so we're keeping a reasonable run through. What we find that with multiple bidders, which we're averaging 2 to 3 bidders per property, and at the moment, so that's fair market value. We're finding that we have to keep our vendors in the loop more about price, and we'll deal with that in our weekly update, because there's a massive amount of information in our week 6 update. But moving along, 1, 1, would you give 2? 2, 2, 2, would you give 3? 3, 3, 3, would you give 4? 4, 4, 4, would you give 5? 5, 5, 5, would you give 6? 6, 6, 6, would you give 7? 7, 7, 7, would you give 8? 8, 8, 8, would you give 9? 9, 9, 9, would you give 10? 10, 10, 10, there we go. 1, 1, 1, would you give 2? 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, would you give 3? 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, would you give 4? 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, would you give 5? 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, would you give 6? 6, 6, 6, 6, 6, would you give 7? 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, and would you give 8? 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, would you give 9? 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, would you give 10? 10, 10. So you're going to see a number of times there, I just slipped in a little number. Didn't do it all the way through, but if you were sitting out and waiting to come in, you know roughly where I am if you can't hear me. Okay, we're going to change it up, and this is probably for a larger, slower auction. I'm keeping the rhythm, but just slowing it down, and also having a filler before the first number. On bid 1, would you give me 2? On bid 2, would you give me 3? On bid 3, would you give me 4? On bid 4, would you give me 5? On bid 5, would you give me 6? On bid 6, would you give me 7? On bid 7, would you give me 8? On bid 8, would you give me 9? On bid 9, would you give me 10? On bid 1, would you give me 2? On bid 2, would you give me 3? On bid 3, would you give me 4? On bid 4, would you give me 5? On bid 5, would you give me 6? On bid 6, would you give me 7? On bid 7, would you give me 8? On bid 8, would you give me 9? On bid 9, would you give me 10? You'll notice that was just rhythmically a wee bit slower, and that allows, if you've got 4 or 5 bidders and they're not bidding all the time, one or two might be planning on coming in a bit late, so it just allows them to the rhythm to flow through. On bid 1, would you give me 2? On bid 2, would you give me 3? On bid 3, would you give me 4? On bid 4, would you give me 5? On bid 5, would you give me 6? On bid 6, would you give me 7? On bid 7, would you give me 8? On bid 8, would you give me 9? On bid 9, would you give me 10? On bid 1, would you give me 2? On bid 2, would you give me 3? On bid 3, would you give me 4? On bid 4, would you give me 5? On bid 5, would you give me 6? On bid 6, would you give me 7? On bid 7, would you give me 8? On bid 8, would you give me 9? On bid 9, would you give me 10? On bid 10. There we go, just mixing that up. So we might go into a rapid. 1, would you give 2? 2, would you give 3? 3, would you give 4? 4, would you give 5? 5, would you give 6? 6, would you give 7? 7, would you give 8? 8, would you give 9? 9, would you give 10? 1, would you give 2? 2, would you give 3? 3, would you give 4? 4, would you give 5? 5, would you give 6? 6, would you give 7? 7, would you give 8? 8, would you give 9? 9, would you give 10? 1, would you give 2? 2, would you give 3? 3, would you give 4? 4, would you give 5? 5, would you give 6? 6, would you give 7? 7, would you give 8? 8, would you give 9? 9, would you give 10? 1, bid them on 2, 2, bid them on 3, 3, bid them on 4, 4, bid them on 5, 5, bid them on 6, 6, bid them on 7, 7, bid them on 8, 8, bid them on 9, 9, bid them on 10. 1, bid them on 2, 2, bid them on 3, 3, bid them on 4, 4, bid them on 5, 5, bid them on 6, 6, bid them on 7, 7, bid them on 8, 8, bid them on 9, 9, bid them on 10. That's a rapid. Everyone's in tune, the vendor, the purchasers, the bidders. We can do that in the hundreds, the millions. That's just a really fast flowing, everyone's ready to buy. I'm bid at 1 million, bid them on 1 1. I'm bid at 1-1, bid them on 1-2. I'm bid at 1-2, bid them on 1-3. I'm bid at 1-3, bid them on 1-4. I'm bid at 1-4, bid them on 1-5. I'm bid at 1-5, bid them on 1-6. I'm bid at 1-6, bid them on 1-7. I'm bid at 1-7, bid them on 1-8. I'm bid at 1-8, bid them on 1-9. I'm bid at 1-9, bid them on 2 million. I'm bid at 2 million, bid them on 2-1. I'm bid at 2-1, bid them on 2-2. I'm bid at 2-2, bid them on 2-3. First call, second call, third and final call, sold at 2-3. There you go. So that's just a very different sort of update with the auctioneer. Hope you enjoyed it. You want us to come along and auction your property? Give us a call, 040 297 0217. Brian at brianmcmanusrealestate.com. Give us a text, email. We're out on the road, so we can come to you anywhere in New South Wales. Thanks.